In the last episode, we built a table by stacking blocks together. And that's a fine way to start, but it's not how real assets get made. Today, we go one level deeper, into edit mode, and actually model something. A small shed you can drop straight onto your map when it's finished, with a door, a window, a roof, and even a little doorknob. Here's the thing. You don't need 100 tools. There's a handful of edit mode tools that do about 90% of all modeling. And by the end of this video, you'll know every one of them. Extrude, Inset, Bevel, Loop Cut, Knife, Edge Slide, and modifiers. Learn these and you can build almost anything. Hi, I'm Nadine, and welcome back to Blender for Modders, the series that teaches you exactly the Blender skills you need to make assets for Farming Simulator, and nothing you don't. So let's switch to my computer and start building. If you missed part 1, I'll link it right here. But here's the 20-second version. In Blender, we work in modes. Everything we did last time was in object mode, moving the whole object around. Today, we live in edit mode, where we change what's inside an object. Its vertices, edges, and faces. Press Tab to jump into edit mode. And remember these three. Press 1 for vertices, 2 for edge, and 3 for face selection mode. Depending on which you choose, tools like G for grabbing affect different parts of the mesh. That's the whole foundation. If that felt too fast, go and watch part 1 first. We are building a small shed today, so let's use our starting cube and resize it to roughly the size of a shed. I will do mine in the end panel and give it an absolute dimension of x4, y3, and z 2.8. And then one quick thing before we build, because it bites everyone at some point. If you are working in edit mode, you mostly want to make sure that your object has a scale of 1 on all axes. If you scaled it in object mode and it says something else, like I just did, fix it with Ctrl-A and apply the scale. Otherwise, you will see strange behaviors in the edit mode tools later. Scale clean? Good. Press Tab to enter edit mode, and let's turn this cube into a shed. Assuming that the grid here is going to be the ground level later, the cube sits halfway in the ground. Let's start by moving it up. Select everything with A and move it up by pressing G and Z, and then 1 to move it up by 1 meter. This leaves a small part still in the ground. This is helpful later when the ground where you want to place your shed is not completely level. You could do the same also in object mode, but there's a difference. The advantage of moving your geometry in edit mode is that the translation of your shape and your pivot point in object mode have not changed. If I now go back to object mode with Tab, you can see it's still on 0, 0, 0, and also the pivot point, it's also still on 0. This point will be used as a base of your object in Giants Editor later, for example when you place it with Ctrl-B there. Of course, you can achieve the same by moving it in object mode and then applying the transforms, but it is good to understand the difference. Okay, back to edit mode. I want a slightly tilted roof for my shed. So I go to vertex selection mode with 1, select these 2 vertices here in the back, grab them with G, and move them downwards a bit with Z and the mouse. Now we want to give the roof some thickness. This is the one tool you'll use more than any other. Extrude takes your selected faces, edges, or vertices and pulls out new geometry which is connected. Go to face selection mode by pressing 3 and then click the top face. Press E and move the mouse up. Notice it creates new geometry. The original face is moving up and down, but there are new connecting faces which keep them together with the existing geometry. And see how it moves perpendicular to the face? This is called it moves along the face's normal. You can change that by pressing Z. The first one gives you a free version, and Z again will extrude the face in the global Z direction, and Z again will go back to face normal Z. You can also see that on top here in the viewport in the text box. And like with every transform, you can type a number to be exact. I will use 0.05. Click to confirm, and that's Extrude region, the default. One thing beginners often get wrong. If you press E and extrude and escape, the faces jump back to their original position. But the extrude still happened, only with value 0, so you just left the new geometry sitting exactly on top of the old. If I move the face now with G, you can see that it acts as if it was extruded. You can also see that in the undo history. The last part here is the extrude. So if you use escape to cancel an extrude, remember that it is not really undone. You still have to undo it by pressing Ctrl Z or here in the menu. When I move it now, you see it's not extruded anymore. It is the same thing as with duplicating objects, which we did in the last video. There are a few more flavors of extruding, but one I find particularly useful. Extrude along normals. I mentioned the normals already, so let's have a look at them. You can visualize the normals in Blender up here in this menu with the cube. Mesh Edit Mode Overlays. Here under Normals, choose the third button which says Face Normals. And now Blender draws a line for each face normal. With the slider, you can make the normal visuals a bit longer. You can see they are always perpendicular to the surface. We will now use the Extrude along normals to give our roof a small overhang. Basically, we want every side of the roof to move outwards a bit. And this is exactly what Extrude along normals does. So first we have to select the complete side faces of the roof. We could do this manually, but there is a more elegant way to do it. Loop selection. In Blender, you often want to select around an object, so there is a shortcut for this. Alt and left click. If I hover my mouse over one of the faces of the roof sides and Alt click, the faces around the whole shape get selected. If your selection looks like this is because the position of your mouse cursor does matter when you loop select. The selected loop will always be perpendicular to the closest edge where your mouse is. So Alt-click on this small edge over here. See the difference? Okay, now for extruding along the normals. Let's use the toolbar this time. The normal extrude we already did is this button here, a cube with an extruded part on top. It will give you a gizmo with a plus for extruding. Extrude along normals is also in this menu when you click and hold and then select Extrude along normals. This one extrudes selected faces that point in different directions, and each one extrudes along its own normal. And that's perfect for thickening a whole shape in all directions at once. So we grab and hold the handle and drag our roof outwards to generate an overhang. And then in the Extrude Settings menu, which pops up, I set it to 0.3 and I check the Offset Even checkbox to make it the same size on all sides. There is another interesting extrude option, and this is Extrude Individual. It does nearly the same, but it keeps every face separate. See, it also extruded each face along its normal, but it did not keep them together. I do not need this here, so I undo this. Using the keyboard shortcuts, you can access the additional extrude options by using Alt-E instead of E. It will give you this pop-up menu where you can choose which extrude you want. But by far, the normal extrude is what you will use most. Let me go back to select mode and get rid of the normal lines. This is what we have now. The shed has a roof, but otherwise it still looks very boring. Right now our shed wall is one big face. There is nowhere to add a door or a window. We need more detail. The Loop Cut tool fixes that. It drops a new edge loop right around the mesh. Press Ctrl R and then hover over a face. A yellow preview loop appears. Move the mouse to flip which direction it runs. And scroll the mouse wheel to add multiple loops at once. Great for evenly spaced planks, for example. I want to have a door and a window in the wall, so I need 2 openings and thus 4 new edge loops. Left-click to confirm. And then in the second part of the command, you can slide them around. You can do that now, but you can access the edge slide also later. We will do that in a minute. If you want to slide the edges around, do it and confirm it with left-click. If you don't want it, right-click or escape to drop the edge loops exactly in the middle. This is what I do now. You can also do that with the toolbar. It is the button here with the cube and the highlighted line in the middle. Click it and then hover over the face to create an edge loop. Here it gets highlighted in the same way in the beginning, but it works a bit differently. When you click once, the edge is created immediately. You can create more edges by changing it in the pop-up menu after the command. Click and drag will allow you to create an edge and move it. I want one here at ground level, so I place it there. Personally, I prefer the keyboard shortcut version because I think it's faster and more versatile. In the menu, you can find the loop cut under Edge and then loop cut and slide. Now we could build these faces as window and door. But let's first have a look at their size. We could use the measure tool from the last video, but if you want to check measures which are also edges, there is a more direct way to do it. Click again on the menu which we use to show the normals, but this time choose edge length. When you select a face now, all the edges around them will have their length shown. So these faces together only have a width of 1.90 m. That is too low for a door. Doors are generally around 2 meters. We could add another loop cut here, but since we don't really need another, we can also slide the existing one upwards. This is where the edge slide comes into play. This moves an edge loop along the surface so nothing warps. Go into edge selection mode by pressing 2 and select the loop. Alt+Click one edge of the loop and then press G twice. Now it slides along the neighboring edges. Move it into place and click. I will also move the one down here because that's a bit too low. The edge slide does not have a toolbar button, but it also lives in the edge menu under edge slide in case you forget the double G. So let's now actually create a door and a window here. Go back to face selection mode with 3. I actually want the window a bit bigger, so I scale this face a bit with S. And I also move it down a bit with G and Z. And then I select the faces which I want to become the door and the window with Shift-click. And now press E for Extrude again. But this time we will not drag the extrude outwards, but inwards to create a small recess for the door and window. And we also want a frame for the door and window. This is what the Inset tool does. Inset creates a smaller face inside a face, following its outline. And that's the fastest way to start a window or any recessed panel. With our faces, we just extruded still selected, press I, and then move the mouse, and see how you get a clean border and an inner face. Click to confirm the inset. A couple of live options while insetting. Hold Ctrl to add depth, push it in or outward. Press O for insetting outwards. And press I again for individual inset. That's perfect for a whole row of windows in one go. But I want just a normal inset, and I click to confirm it. After the inset, press E again and pull the inner face inward for another small recess. This gives some depth to the window frame and lets the glass for the window or the filling for the door sit inside the frame. But what if you need an edge exactly where there is no geometry to create a loop cut from, like a diagonal brace or an angled cut? Imagine our door is going to be a wooden door, and we want to create a diagonal brace which helps keep the door square. For this, we also have a tool, the knife. It can cut through faces and create new edges along the cut, separating the faces it cuts. Press K to access the tool. Then left-click to place a point along your cut. Click again for the second point. The status bar shows all your options while cutting. The important ones are Enter or spacebar to confirm, Escape to cancel, C to cut through the whole mesh instead of just the visible side, and XYZ to lock the cut to an axis. Hold Shift to snap to the edge midpoints. And if you only want to cut inside your selection, press Shift K instead of K. I confirm this cut with Enter, and then I do another cut next to it. Then we can Shift select our new faces and extrude them a bit with E to create a 3D brace for our door. But the door still looks a bit empty. There is no handle to open it. Let's create one. Every tool we used so far pushed existing geometry around or expanded it. Now we create new geometry and add it to our shed. We will build something like this now. Now we can reuse something we learned in the last video, but this time we do it in edit mode. Click and hold the Add Cube menu and change it to Add Cylinder. And then on the door where you want the doorknob, hover over the door and create a cylinder, which has roughly the outline of a doorknob. Don't worry too much about it, you can still change the size later. You can also change the vertices here, that is how many segments go around the cylinder. I set mine to 16. Let me also get rid of the edge lengths because this clutters the view now. And this looks like a very basic doorknob, but we can do better. I want the knob to have a thicker base and handle, but a thinner connector in between. And we can achieve that with loop cuts. Press Ctrl R and create 4 loop cuts. I move them a bit towards the door because I want the base to be smaller than the knob. Now I want the middle two to become thinner. I switch to edge selection mode with 2 and then Alt+Click one of the loops. Then I also hold Shift and click the second loop. Now with both edge loops selected, I press S for scale and scale them down. I also want the two edges to be further apart, so I scale again, but only on the Y-axis this time, and widen the distance between the edges. That might be the X-axis for you if your shed is oriented differently. And now our doorknob looks already a bit more realistic. But we can still do better. Our knob is round, but very blocky. An actual doorknob will be more rounded. We can do that by beveling the edges. Alt-click the outer edge of the knob to make a loop selection, and then press Ctrl+B for bevel. Now you can drag away from the knob with the mouse to create a beveled edge. By scrolling with the mouse wheel, you can change how many segments you create. I will go with 2. And by dragging the mouse more or less, you can increase or decrease the bevel effect. I will move mine roughly halfway along the side faces of the knob. We can also select the outer edge of the knob base and the inner edge of the knob and add a simple bevel with 1 segment here. Alt-Shift-click the 2 edges, Ctrl+B, and then reduce the segments to 1 and drag a smaller bevel here. And look, our doorknob looks actually quite nice. You will use beveling a lot, but beveling is generally the last thing you do to your model because it makes other operations harder because of the additional geometry. Basically, in 3D modeling, you will hardly ever see these harsh edges, which our shed has in all the corners at the moment. You would at least create a bevel with one segment for most edges, at least for a detailed model, because a lot of shaders don't do well with these single harsh edges. I can even prove this in Blender right now. Go back to Object Mode with Tab, and then right-click your object and choose Shade Smooth. See how strange this looks? You get weird shadows and lines, especially here at the door. These are shader arrows. Adding a bevel to these edges will make the shader hold the corners much better. But instead of adding a bevel to every single edge manually, there is a better and easier way. We will use a modifier for this. What is a modifier? A modifier is something which you can add to your model and which will make changes to the whole model, but these changes are reversible as long as you do not apply the modifier. Modifiers can do a lot. They are very powerful. There will be at least one separate video specifically about modifiers, so we will not go into too much detail right now. With the shed selected, find the wrench icon in your Properties panel, click it, and choose Add Modifier. In the search field, type Bevel and choose Bevel. This modifier will bevel all the edges in your model. By default, it acts on all edges where the adjacent faces have an angle higher than 30 degrees with each other. And it will create two segments by default. Check how the model looks now. Much, much better. The weird shadows are gone, and the corners are sharper again. It might sound a bit counterintuitive that we round the shapes by beveling, and that makes them look sharper. But it is not the rounding which does this. It would have the same effect if I changed the bevel modifier not to round the edges at all. I can do that here on the profile and set it to 1. But instead, it is the additional generated edges which help the shader display the foam better. The Blender shader is a bit more sensitive to shading problems than the Farming Simulator shaders. For Farming Simulator, a bevel with one segment would be absolutely fine. In Blender, if I change the segments to 1 and shade smooth again, you can see that the shading errors come back slightly. We have a shadow over here, for example. But it is definitely much less than without the bevel. Let's compare it to the version without the beveling. With this button over here, you can deactivate the modifier in the viewport. Click it and compare the two. See how much of a difference the bevel makes? But on the other hand, don't go overboard with beveling. It adds a lot of new faces to your model, and for game assets you always want to try to keep the number of faces and vertices as low as possible for performance reasons. So use as many bevels as necessary, but as few as possible. If your model is only viewed from afar, for example, like a background asset, you probably don't need any bevels. And also bear in mind the distance from which your asset will be viewed normally. Our doorknob, for example, looked blocky to us when we beveled it, but we were looking at it really closely. Probably the blocky version would already have been fine for the game, because while playing, you generally will not zoom in on a doorknob like this. Keep that in mind while modeling. And those are the most important tools in the edit mode. Look back at what we used. Extrude to pull out new geometry, Loop Cut, Loop Select, and Edge Slide to add and place detail, Inset for the frames, Knife for custom cuts, and Bevel for round shapes, and the Bevel modifier to get clearer edges without shading arrows. Master these tools and you can model almost any static asset a map needs. Feel free to add more windows or other details to the shed. And then make sure to save your model for the next video, because we will build on it further in the next episode. Our Blender foundation is by no means complete yet. Our shed is only white, it doesn't have a material. We didn't touch UVs, the other modifiers, or exporting yet. There are many more tools and techniques to discover. That's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you learned something new today and feel inspired now to build your own models. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment if this video was helpful for you, because doing so would help me reach more modders who need to see this. Please click here for a related video or here for another one you might like. Don't be a stranger. See you next time.